read some of a very abridged version of the foreword to your book, Trauma, the Invisible Epidemic, because I think it really highlights the amazing work you do in the conversation that we're having. So as I mentioned, it's
Thank
the
you.
abridged version. If anyone wants to go and check out the full version, they can go
Thank you.
purchase your wonderful book. But it's actually written
Thank you.
by Lady Gaga, who was a patient of yours, her real name being Stephanie. I was gently
Thank you.
thrown into an emergency care room at some private hospital in New York during a world tour. I remember a vision of a doctor and a nurse. They asked me calmly to count back from 100 as I continued to scream. I recall saying, "Why is no one panicking?" And they encouraged me to keep counting back from 100 until I got to about 69. I think that's when I stopped counting and declared, "Hi, I'm Stephanie." I also confessed that I couldn't feel my body and that I was completely numb. I looked at the nurse who had been waiting with me, not realizing that another doctor had left and a new one had arrived. "Why didn't you bring me a real doctor?" I asked the nurse. Paul replied by saying, "I'm an Italian from New Jersey," and that was when I decided I was willing to talk to him. My dad is an Italian from New Jersey, so I figured at least I knew what I was dealing with. At that moment, I began a journey that I've continued ever since, a journey with a man I had never met before, but who would somehow make it part of his life's work to understand and help me. It wasn't until 2 years of working together that he revealed to me that he took 6 months to assess me and figure out if I was movable when I was clearly in a state of traumatic paralysis. I will not tell you everything that has happened between the two of us, but I will tell you this. Paul only wore his white coat when he needed to remind me he's a doctor most of the time, by mutual consent. Paul has related to me as a fellow human being and a safe man. We have learned about each other as we began a process of healing for me that I thought was impossible. I can now say with certainty that this man saved my life. He made my life worth living, but most importantly, he empowered me to find and reclaim myself again. Paul, it makes me want to
Thank you.
cry reading that. That is so,
Me too. So
that is
thank you.
so beautiful. That's why I really wanted to read it.
Thank
How
you.
important is it
Thank you.
being with a patient and listening? Like, I know within my job, listening is the most important gift I can give someone. And I
Right.
want to know how important it is for you.
I think it's the most important thing, right? If you think about the narrative there, and Stephanie has been brave and open about the trauma in her life, right? Which is so helpful because it helps people who may look up to her, right? And
Yes.
see her as, what a paragon of goodness and perseverance and achievement, and to see like, oh, like I don't have to be ashamed of my trauma. Like, look, she has trauma too. Like, it's not something that just happens to people, because we can all feel so isolated. Oh, it's just happened to me, right? That so her openness about like, look, there's trauma in her life, and she was experiencing trauma very acutely at the time, and it's not uncommon that a person thinks like there's something medical going on, right? So that, why didn't you bring me a real doctor, is like, why is there a psychiatrist here, right?
Yes.
Does it make any sense, right? Like, because what's going on is medical, so we got to give me a medicine, right? That's not uncommon, right? So how to approach that, right, is, I think, how to get someone to engage, to trust you and begin talking, is to try and meet them where they're at, right? If I didn't know that she's an Italian from New York, I wouldn't have told her I was an Italian from New Jersey, right? But I'm
Yes.
thinking like, look, how do I want to be a real human with her, and I want her to see that so that she can feel like a real human, right? Instead of just a ball of terror and panic, right? And then begin to communicate so that she's not terrified and alone in herself,
Mm.
right? And that's something that sure, it's important to do as a physician, going to see a patient who's in acute distress, but it is also something that all of us can bring to our lives, of just being like a real person with other people, right? That's the bridge to helping, whether it's helping the person who's like sitting next to you at work, right? Or it's helping the person who looks distressed as, you're standing in the checkout line right at the grocery store, or it's someone that maybe a psychiatrist is trying to help professionally, right? Is to be a real person, right? And that acknowledgement goes such a long way to eliminating shame, right? So if you think being a real person and ultimately sharing with her aspects of my own trauma, right, lets her know, like, okay, like I'm not looking at her in some stigmatized way,
Yeah.
right? I'm looking at her as another human being who's going through something profoundly human, right? Which is what she shares with other people, that like she is a human being who's gone through really frightening things that are profoundly human, and she wants other people who look up to her to see that that is a shared humanness among
Yeah.
all of us. And I think that's the way that I was able to be helpful to her, and it's the way that really all of us can be helpful to other people, is by paying attention and being real.